Millionaire is unjustly sentenced to pay 988 motters to his arrogant ex-wife until a 7-year-old orphan girl reveals the shocking truth. Before we tell this moving tale of sadness and solitude, share where you're watching from and subscribe for more touching stories. The gavel echoed through the courthouse like a gunshot, each bang driving another nail into Marcus Whitmore's financial coffin. Judge Harrison's words cut through his soul like shattered glass. Mr. Whitmore, you are hereby ordered to pay Elena Whitmore $988 million in alimony and asset division, representing half of your documented wealth accumulated during your 8-year marriage. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras flashed despite the no photography rule, and spectators whispered in shocked disbelief. Elena Rodriguez, who had legally taken his name during their supposed marriage, sat in the plaintiff's section wearing a designer Armani suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her crimson lips curved into a victorious smile as she adjusted her pearl necklace, a gesture so calculated and cold that Marcus felt his stomach turn. 8 years of marriage, she had claimed under oath. 8 years of building his empire together, supporting his dreams, sacrificing her own career as a pediatric nurse to be the perfect corporate wife. The jury of 12 Denver citizens had believed every calculated tear, every rehearsed sob, every carefully crafted story of a devoted woman wronged by a heartless billionaire. Marcus's hands trembled as his lead attorney, Jonathan Pierce, a man who charged $800 an hour, whispered urgent appeals about grounds for reversal. At 45 years old, Marcus had built his fortune from nothing. The son of a factory worker and a school cafeteria cook, he had started his first software company in his parents' garage when he was 23, living on ramen noodles and determination. Now everything he had built through decades of 18-hour days was about to disappear. The tech company that employed 3,000 people, the charitable foundations that had built schools in 12 countries, the medical research grants that were finding cures for childhood diseases, all of it would be stripped away by a woman who had manipulated every moment of their relationship with the skill of a master chess player. Your Honor, Marcus stood on shaking legs, his voice cracking with desperation. There has to be some mistake. The evidence doesn't add up. My private investigators found inconsistencies in... Mr. Whitmore, you've had your chance to present your case over the past 3 months, Judge Harrison interrupted, his face stern behind wire-rimmed glasses. The documentation is clear and comprehensive. Mrs. Whitmore has provided marriage certificates, joint bank statements, photographs spanning 8 years, testimony from alleged friends and colleagues. The jury has deliberated for 16 hours and found unanimously in her favor. Elena's lawyer, David Steinberg, a shark in a $3,000 suit who specialized in high-stakes divorce cases, leaned back in his leather chair with the satisfied expression of a predator who had just secured his biggest kill. They had orchestrated this destruction with surgical precision. Every document, every witness, every carefully crafted lie had led to this moment of financial annihilation. Marcus felt the walls of his life crumbling around him. His mother, who had died 2 years earlier, had always warned him that his wealth would attract the wrong kind of people. "Money changes how people see you, son," she had said from her hospital bed. "Be careful who you trust with your heart." But as Judge Harrison prepared to finalize the devastating ruling that would effectively end Marcus's ability to continue his philanthropic work, the heavy oak courthouse doors burst open with a crash that made everyone turn. A small figure in a worn blue dress ran down the center aisle, her dark hair flying behind her like a banner of hope. The little girl couldn't have been more than 7 years old, clutching a manila envelope against her chest like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Wait! Undi," she shouted, her young voice cutting through the chaos with surprising authority. "They were never really married. I have proof right here that everything is fake." Court security immediately moved toward her, but something in her desperate, intelligent eyes made Judge Harrison raise his hand in a commanding gesture. The courtroom fell completely silent, 300 people staring at this unexpected interruption that had transformed a routine legal proceeding into something extraordinary. Marcus's heart stopped beating for what felt like an eternity. He recognized her instantly. Sophie Chen, the orphan who lived at St. Mary's home just 6 blocks from his downtown office. But how could she possibly know anything about his marriage to Elena? And what proof could a 7-year-old child have that his team of expensive lawyers and private investigators had somehow missed? Elena's face had gone completely pale, her confident mask slipping for the first time in the 3 months since these proceedings had begun. 4 hours earlier, 7-year-old Sophie Chen sat cross-legged on the dusty floor of St. Mary's Orphanage Records office, surrounded by cardboard boxes filled with decades of forgotten documents. The room smelled of old paper and faded ink, a repository of lives lived and stories mostly forgotten. Sister Margaret had asked her to help organize old marriage certificates, birth records, and legal documents, a task that most of the other children found mind-numbingly boring. But Sophie was different from the other 23 children who called St. Mary's home. She possessed an unusual gift for seeing patterns, for remembering tiny details that adults overlooked, for understanding complex systems that should have been far beyond her 7 years. The nuns said she had an old soul, but Sophie knew the truth was simpler. When you had no parents to protect you, you learned to protect yourself by paying attention to everything. Sophie had lived at St. Mary's for exactly 7 years, 2 months, and 16 days, ever since the rainy night when a drunk driver had crashed head-on into her parents' Honda Civic on Interstate 25. She had been 10 months old then, too young to remember their faces or voices, but old enough to carry the genetic gifts they had passed down to her, her mother's photographic memory and her father's analytical mind. The nuns had raised her with genuine love and kindness, especially Sister Margaret, who had recognized Sophie's intellectual gifts early and nurtured them carefully. While other children played with dolls or video games, Sophie preferred helping with administrative tasks, organizing files, and learning how the adult world actually functioned through its paperwork and legal requirements. As she methodically sorted through marriage certificates dating back to the 1980s, something caught her eye that made her stomach twist with recognition. A familiar name appeared on a certificate that looked somehow wrong. Marcus Whitmore. She knew that name intimately. He was the extraordinarily kind man who had donated 15 computers to their orphanage's learning center, who sometimes stopped by on Thursday afternoons to read stories to the younger children, who remembered every child's name and asked about their schoolwork with genuine interest. This marriage certificate claimed that Marcus Whitmore had married Elena Rodriguez exactly 8 years, 3 months, and 12 days ago in Mountain Ridge, Colorado. But something about the document immediately struck Sophie as fundamentally wrong. The notary signature looked different from the hundreds of other certificates she had examined, and the official courthouse seal seemed inconsistent with what she knew legitimate seals should look like. Sophie had spent countless hours over the past 3 years helping Sister Margaret with complex paperwork for the orphanage. She knew what authentic legal documents looked like, how they were structured, what kind of paper they used, how official seals were applied. This certificate had subtle inconsistencies that made her trained eye immediately suspicious. She pulled out her tablet, one of the computers that Mr. Whitmore himself had donated to their technology program, and began conducting the kind of methodical research that Sister Margaret had taught her for their historical preservation projects. Her small fingers flew across the keyboard as she accessed public records databases, cross-referencing information with the systematic approach of a professional investigator. What she discovered in the next 2 hours made her gasp aloud in the empty records room. The notary listed on Marcus's marriage certificate, Harold Fletcher, had died in a car accident on March 15, 2014. exactly 2 years and 4 months before the supposed wedding ceremony had taken place. The courthouse seal belonged to the Mountain Ridge Municipal Building, which had been demolished on September 8, 2013, nearly 3 years before Elena claimed they had been married there. But Sophie's investigation revealed something even more disturbing. Elena Rodriguez had used multiple identities over the past decade, appearing in public records as Elena Martinez in California, Elena Santos in Texas, and Elena Vasquez in Arizona. Each identity came with a different fabricated backstory, different claims about her education and employment, different stories about previous marriages and tragic circumstances. Sophie's heart raced with the terrible excitement of uncovering a conspiracy so complex that it had fooled judges, lawyers, and financial experts. Elena wasn't just a woman trying to take advantage of a wealthy man. She was a sophisticated criminal who had built an entire false identity specifically designed to trap and destroy Marcus Whitmore. 8 years earlier, Marcus Whitmore had been a very different man from the broken figure now sitting in that Denver courtroom. At 37, he was brilliant but profoundly lonely, channeling all his emotional energy into building his software empire because personal relationships had always seemed impossibly complicated. His extraordinary wealth attracted fortune hunters, social climbers, and people who saw him as a walking bank account rather than a human being with hopes, fears, and dreams. Success had come to Marcus faster than he had ever imagined possible. His first company, developed in his parents' garage, had revolutionized data security for small businesses. By 30, he was worth $50 million. By 35, his net worth had climbed to $400 million. But with each milestone, genuine human connections became more elusive and precious. That's exactly why Elena Rodriguez had seemed like an absolute miracle when she entered his life at the Denver Children's Hospital annual charity gala on October 12, 2016. She wasn't working the room like the other women who typically approached him at such events. Instead, she was volunteering at the registration table, beautiful but understated, wearing a simple black dress that probably cost less than the wine being served. "I don't usually approach major donors," she had said with a shy smile that seemed completely genuine, "but I wanted to thank you personally for your foundation's contributions to our pediatric ward. The children at Mountain View Elementary got their first computer lab because of your generosity, and seeing their faces light up when they use those machines, well, it reminded me why I became a nurse in the first place." Marcus had been immediately captivated by her apparent selflessness and genuine passion for helping children. Finally, here was someone who seemed to care about his charitable mission rather than his bank account balance. Over the following months, Elena played her role with Oscar-worthy perfection. She was hesitant about accepting expensive gifts, insisted on modest dinner dates at neighborhood restaurants, and spoke with apparent passion about her work with sick children at the hospital. Every detail of Elena's elaborate backstory had been carefully crafted to lower Marcus's psychological defenses. The abusive ex-husband who had drained her savings and left her afraid to trust wealthy men. The sick mother in Mexico City who needed expensive cancer treatments that Elena couldn't afford on a nurse's salary. The dedication to helping underprivileged children that supposedly left her with no time for a social life or personal relationships. Marcus fell completely and utterly for the sophisticated fiction Elena had constructed around herself. She was everything he had been searching for: intelligent, compassionate, seemingly immune to the corrupting influence of money, and genuinely committed to making the world a better place for vulnerable children. When Elena suggested a private wedding ceremony after 6 months of dating, "I'm too embarrassed about my family situation for a big celebration, and I don't want photographers documenting the most intimate moment of our lives," Marcus agreed immediately. He wanted to protect her from embarrassment, to give her the emotional security she claimed she had never experienced with any other man. The ceremony had taken place on a cold Thursday afternoon in February 2017 in what Eleanor claimed was a small courthouse in Mountain Ridge, a picturesque town 2 hours outside Denver. Marcus had driven there through a snowstorm, believing he was about to marry the woman who would finally make his life complete and meaningful. The officiant had been professional and warm. The paperwork seemed completely legitimate, and Elena had cried what appeared to be tears of pure joy as they exchanged vows in the small, wood-paneled room. Marcus never suspected for even a moment that the entire event was an elaborate theatrical performance, staged in a building that wasn't even a functioning courthouse anymore. For the first 18 months of their supposed marriage, Elena had been everything Marcus had dreamed of in a life partner. She was the devoted wife who supported his business decisions, hosted charity events with grace and charm, and seemed genuinely invested in building a shared future dedicated to helping others. But Elena's true nature had begun emerging gradually, like poison, seeping through tiny cracks in a foundation. The sweet, selfless nurse slowly revealed herself to be demanding, materialistic, and coldly calculating in ways that Marcus initially explained away as stress or adjustment to their new life together. By the time Marcus fully realized what was happening, Elena had positioned herself perfectly as the ideal wronged wife, ready to destroy him completely and walk away with enough money to fund her deceptions for the rest of her life. 7-year-old Sophie Chen ran through the busy streets of downtown Denver with more pure determination than most adults ever summon in their entire lives. The manila envelope containing her explosive evidence bounced against her chest as her small legs carried her toward the courthouse, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and absolute moral certainty. She had never left St. Mary's orphanage alone before. The nuns had strict rules about children venturing into the city without supervision, but this situation was bigger than following institutional policies. Mr. Whitmore had always been genuinely kind to the forgotten children that society typically overlooked. When other wealthy philanthropists donated money and never looked back, Marcus actually visited regularly, spending time with kids who desperately needed positive adult attention. Sophie remembered vividly the previous Christmas when she had been bedridden with pneumonia and couldn't participate in the holiday party with the other children. While everyone else was opening presents and eating cake in the main hall, Marcus had quietly slipped into the infirmary and sat beside her bed for over an hour, reading her favorite story about a brave little princess who saved her kingdom through intelligence and courage rather than magic or royal privilege. "You know, Sophie," he had said that day, his voice gentle and encouraging, "sometimes the smallest people can make the biggest difference in the world. It's not about how tall you are or how much money you have. It's about having the courage to do what's right, even when it's scary." Now, as Sophie navigated the intimidating maze of downtown Denver, those words echoed in her mind like a personal mission statement. It was her turn to be brave for someone who had always shown kindness to children who had nothing and no one to protect them. The courthouse steps seemed absolutely enormous to her small frame. Each step was nearly half her height, but Sophie climbed them with fierce determination, clutching the envelope that contained the power to save a good man from complete destruction. Inside the building, the environment was overwhelmingly intimidating. Soaring ceilings, polished marble floors, and serious-looking adults in expensive business suits walking quickly past her as if she were invisible. "Excuse me, sir," Sophie said politely to a uniformed security guard, tugging gently on his sleeve to get his attention. "I need to find Mr. Marcus Whitmore's trial. I have really important evidence that could change everything." The guard looked down at this tiny girl with initially skeptical eyes. Children didn't typically appear in federal courthouses carrying legal evidence. "Little lady, you can't just walk into active legal proceedings. Where are your parents or guardian?" "My parents died in a car accident when I was a baby," Sophie explained simply, without any trace of self-pity. "I live at St. Mary's orphanage with the nuns, But this is really, really important. Mr. Whitmore is about to lose almost $1 billion because of lies, and I can prove that his whole marriage was completely fake. Something in her earnest, intelligent expression made the security guard pause and reconsider his initial dismissal. This wasn't a confused child or someone playing games. Her vocabulary, her posture, her direct eye contact, everything about her suggested someone far more mature than her 7 years should have allowed. "What kind of proof could you possibly have, sweetheart?" he asked, kneeling down to her eye level with genuine curiosity. Sophie opened the envelope carefully and showed him the top document. The marriage certificate is completely fraudulent. The notary who supposedly signed it was already dead when the ceremony took place, and the courthouse where they claimed to have gotten married was demolished 3 years before their wedding date. I have death certificates, demolition records, and public documents that prove Mrs. Elena Rodriguez has been using multiple fake identities to commit marriage fraud in at least 4 different states. The guard's expression transformed from skepticism to amazement, then to urgent concern. This little girl was speaking with the precision and authority of a trained legal investigator, presenting evidence that could potentially overturn a billion-dollar court ruling. "How do you know Mr. Whitmore?" he asked. "He donates computers and supplies to our orphanage and comes to read stories to us younger kids. He always remembers our names and asks about our schoolwork like we actually matter to him. He's one of the few adults who treats orphans like we're real people instead of just charity cases. That woman is trying to steal everything from him using completely fake documents, and somebody has to stop her." Just then, they both heard angry shouting echoing from courtroom 7. The guard quickly led Sophie toward the disturbance, where they could see through the small reinforced window that Marcus's trial was reaching its devastating climax. Elena sat in the plaintiff's section with a triumphant smile as Judge Harrison prepared to rule in her favor. Sophie looked up at the security guard with eyes that held far too much wisdom for someone her age. "Please," she whispered, "let me save him." The massive courthouse doors crashed open with a sound like thunder, and every person in courtroom 7 turned to stare as 7-year-old Sophie Chen ran down the center aisle with the determined stride of someone on a mission from God himself. Her small voice cut through the shocked silence with crystal clarity. "Your Honor, they were never legally married. I have documented proof that their entire marriage was an elaborate fraud." Judge Harrison leaned forward over his elevated bench, his stern expression softening with surprise as he studied this completely unexpected interruption. In 32 years of presiding over legal proceedings, he had never witnessed anything quite like this moment. "Young lady," he said with gentle authority, "this is a very serious legal proceeding involving nearly $1 billion in disputed assets. What exactly do you believe you have there?" Sophie walked forward with careful, measured steps, her worn sneakers squeaking softly on the polished courthouse floor. Despite being surrounded by hundreds of intimidating adults, she showed no signs of nervousness or uncertainty. "Your Honor, my name is Sophie Chen. I'm 7 years old, and I live at St. Mary's Orphanage on Colfax Avenue. Mr. Whitmore has been very kind to all of us children there, donating computers and reading us stories, and I couldn't let him lose everything because of lies." Elena Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her perfectly composed demeanor beginning to crack like ice under sudden pressure. Her high-priced attorney, David Steinberg, whispered urgently in her ear, but Elena's face was rapidly draining of color. "I was helping Sister Margaret organize old legal documents this morning," Sophie continued, her young voice remarkably steady and clear, "and I discovered Mr. Whitmore's marriage certificate in our files. But something looked wrong with it, so I used our computer lab to investigate." She held up the manila envelope with both hands like a sacred offering. The notary who allegedly signed their marriage certificate was named Harold Fletcher. But Mr. Fletcher died in a car accident on March 15, 2014. This certificate claims he notarized their marriage ceremony on June 18, 2016, more than 2 years after he was already dead. A collective gasp rippled through the packed courtroom. Several jurors leaned forward in their seats, and Marcus felt his heart begin to race with the first genuine hope he had experienced in months. Sophie opened her envelope and carefully extracted a thick stack of official documents. Additionally, the courthouse seal on this marriage certificate belongs to the Mountain Ridge Municipal Building. But according to county demolition records, that building was completely torn down on September 8, 2013, nearly 3 years before Mrs. Rodriguez claims they were married there. Judge Harrison's eyes widened with each revelation. "Approach the bench immediately, young lady." Sophie walked forward confidently, extending the papers toward the judge with small hands that showed no trembling whatsoever. As Judge Harrison began examining the documents, his expression grew increasingly grave and focused. "Furthermore," Sophie continued, her voice gaining strength and authority, "Elena Rodriguez has been using multiple false identities across several states. She was Elena Martinez when she married wealthy businessman David Thompson in San Diego, California in 2012. She became Elena Santos when she filed for bankruptcy in Houston, Texas in 2014, claiming to have been married to oil executive Robert Hayes. In Phoenix, Arizona, she used the name Elena Vasquez to establish credit accounts and rental agreements." Elena suddenly stood up, her calm facade completely shattered. "This is absolutely ridiculous. You're going to overturn months of careful legal proceedings based on the fantasies of some random orphan child. She's obviously been coached by Marcus's legal team to fabricate these ridiculous accusations." But Sophie wasn't finished with her presentation. She pulled out another set of documents with the methodical precision of a seasoned investigator. "I also discovered that Elena Rodriguez never actually worked as a pediatric nurse at Denver Children's Hospital, despite claiming this employment under oath. There are no payroll records, no employee identification numbers, no colleagues who remember working with her. Mountain View Elementary School has no record of receiving computer equipment donations facilitated by anyone named Elena Rodriguez." Judge Harrison examined each document with increasingly intense scrutiny, his legal training immediately recognizing the authenticity of Sophie's evidence. The marriage certificate that had seemed so official and convincing just minutes before now appeared obviously fraudulent when subjected to proper verification. Marcus felt his entire world shifting on its axis as the pieces of a puzzle he had never understood began falling into place with devastating clarity. All those times Eleanor had been mysteriously vague about her work schedule, all those charity events where her supposed nursing colleagues never materialized, all those stories that had never quite added up, everything now made perfect, horrible sense. "Your Honor," Marcus's lead attorney said, rising quickly from his seat, "we respectfully request an immediate recess to thoroughly examine this new evidence and verify these extraordinary claims." But Elena was already moving desperately toward the courtroom exit, her composure completely destroyed. The woman who had walked into court that morning, expecting to claim nearly $1 billion in fraudulent alimony, was now fleeing like the sophisticated criminal she had always been. The little orphan girl had just exposed one of the most elaborate marriage fraud schemes in American legal history. As Elena Rodriguez rushed toward the courtroom exit in full panic mode, Judge Harrison's voice boomed across the room with commanding authority. "Mrs. Rodriguez, or whatever your actual legal name might be, you will remain seated until these proceedings are properly concluded. Bailiffs, please ensure that the defendant does not leave this courtroom." 2 court officers immediately moved to block the exits while Elena froze in the center aisle, her designer heels clicking to an abrupt halt on the marble floor. Her carefully constructed mask of wounded innocence had completely disintegrated, replaced by the cold, calculating expression that revealed her true nature for the first time since the trial had begun. Sophie, still standing confidently near the judge's bench, continued presenting her meticulously researched evidence with the systematic precision of someone far beyond her 7 years of life experience. Your Honor, my investigation also revealed that Elena Rodriguez has been illegally collecting Social Security disability benefits under 3 different names and Social Security numbers. She owns undisclosed real estate properties in Las Vegas, Nevada, and Miami, Florida, that were never mentioned during these divorce proceedings. Marcus stared at this remarkable little girl in absolute amazement and profound gratitude. In the span of a single morning, Sophie had accomplished what his team of expensive private investigators and attorneys had failed to achieve over months of professional effort. She had unraveled a deception so sophisticated and comprehensive that it had fooled judges, financial experts, and seasoned legal professionals. Judge Harrison was now studying additional documents that Sophie had provided, his expression growing darker and more concerned with each page he reviewed. Miss Chen, these are extremely serious criminal allegations you're presenting. How did you know to look for these specific types of fraudulent activities? Sophie's voice carried the quiet wisdom of someone who had learned too young that the adult world was often built on lies and deception. At St. Mary's Orphanage, Sister Margaret teaches all of us children to always carefully verify official documents, because some bad people try to fake adoption papers and birth certificates to take children away for terrible reasons. She showed us how to check notary seals, courthouse records, cross-reference Social Security numbers, and verify employment histories. The practical, street-smart education that Sophie had received as an orphan had equipped her with exactly the investigative skills needed to expose Elena's elaborate criminal enterprise. While privileged children learned piano lessons and tennis, Sophie had learned how to protect herself by understanding the systems that adults use to lie and manipulate. Elena's attorney, David Steinberg, was frantically whispering to his client, but Elena angrily pushed him away. "This is completely insane," she hissed loudly enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "You're going to destroy months of legitimate legal proceedings because of some orphan's ridiculous conspiracy theories. This child has obviously been brainwashed and coached by Marcus's legal team, but the damage was irreversible and devastating." Judge Harrison had examined enough evidence to understand that absolutely everything about Eleanor's case had been built on an elaborate foundation of lies, forged documents, and stolen identities. The marriage certificate was fake, her employment history was fabricated, her victim narrative was a carefully rehearsed performance, and her entire legal identity was a criminal fiction designed to steal nearly $1 billion. "Mr. Whitmore," Judge Harrison said with grave solemnity, "it appears that you have been the victim of an extremely sophisticated and premeditated fraud conspiracy. Miss Chen's evidence strongly suggests that not only was your marriage certificate completely fabricated, but that the defendant has perpetrated similar criminal schemes against multiple wealthy individuals across several states." Marcus felt an overwhelming mixture of relief, fury, and profound gratitude washing over him in powerful waves. Relief that his life's work and philanthropic mission wouldn't be destroyed by a criminal's lies. Fury that he had been so completely and systematically deceived by someone he had genuinely loved and trusted. But overriding both emotions was deep, transformative gratitude toward the brave little girl who had risked everything to save a man she barely knew. As court officers moved to officially detain Elena on charges of fraud, identity theft, and perjury, she turned toward Marcus with pure, undiluted hatred burning in her eyes. "You think you've won something here, Marcus? There are dozens of others like me out there, and some of them are much smarter than I am. You'll never be able to trust anyone ever again. I've destroyed your ability to believe in love, and that's worth more than any money." But Marcus wasn't looking at Elena anymore. His entire attention was focused on Sophie Chen, This absolutely extraordinary child who had demonstrated more courage, integrity, and moral strength than any adult in that courtroom. The little orphan girl who had saved him from financial destruction was about to change his life in ways that neither of them could yet begin to imagine. The first chapter of their incredible story together was ending, but Sophie's dramatic revelation in that Denver courthouse was actually just the beginning of something much more profound and life-changing than anyone could have predicted. 3 weeks after the explosive courtroom revelation that had made national headlines, Marcus Whitmore sat in the sterile visiting room of St. Mary's Orphanage, his hands trembling slightly as he watched Sophie Chen carefully arrange a chess set between them. The little girl who had saved his fortune moved each piece with the same methodical precision she had shown while destroying Elena's elaborate fraud. "Sister Margaret taught me to play last year," Sophie said quietly, her small fingers positioning the white pawns in perfect formation. "She said chess helps children like us learn to think several moves ahead, to protect ourselves by seeing patterns that other people miss." Marcus studied her face, still amazed by the intelligence that sparkled behind those dark eyes. "Sophie, I need you to understand something very important, what you did in that courtroom. You saved my entire life's work. Because of your courage, I can continue helping children all over the world." Sophie looked up from the chessboard with an expression far too serious for someone her age. "I know about your schools in Africa and the hospitals in South America. Sister Margaret showed us articles about the good things you do with your money. That's why I couldn't let that bad woman steal it all." The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and law enforcement investigations. Elena Rodriguez, whose real name turned out to be Carmen Elena Vasquez, was now facing federal charges in 4 states. The FBI had discovered that her marriage fraud scheme had targeted at least 6 wealthy men over the past decade, stealing an estimated $37 million before Marcus became her biggest intended victim. "I've been thinking about something," Marcus said, moving his first pawn forward. "You're clearly too intelligent to be limited by a standard curriculum. Have you ever thought about what you want to be when you grow up?" Sophie considered her response move carefully, both on the chessboard and in their conversation. "I want to help other children who don't have families. Maybe become a lawyer so I can stop bad people from hurting kids, or a detective so I can solve mysteries that grown-ups can't figure out." Marcus felt his heart constrict with emotion. This remarkable child had already demonstrated more moral courage and investigative skill than most adults would show in a lifetime. "What if I told you that I want to help make sure you get the best education possible? I'd like to set up a special scholarship fund just for you." "That's very kind, Mr. Whitmore, but..." Sophie moved her knight in an unexpected pattern that immediately put pressure on Marcus's position. "I've learned that when adults make big promises to orphans, they usually disappear after a few months. People feel guilty for a while, but then they forget about us." The painful honesty in her voice hit Marcus like a physical blow. How many times had well-meaning adults made promises to these children only to abandon them when the novelty wore off? "Sophie, I want you to understand something. I'm not going anywhere. What happened between us in that courtroom, it changed me. You didn't just save my money, you reminded me what real courage looks like." Sister Margaret appeared in the doorway, her kind face creased with concern. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a development. The State Child Services investigator is here. Someone has filed a petition to adopt Sophie." Sophie's chess piece froze halfway to its destination. "What? Who would want to adopt me? I'm 7 years old. Most people want babies, not kids who ask too many questions." Marcus felt a sudden protective fury rise in his chest. After everything Sophie had been through, after the incredible courage she had shown, someone was trying to use her moment of fame for their own purposes. "Sister Margaret, do we know who filed this petition?" "A couple from California named the Hendersons. They saw Sophie on the news and claim they've always wanted to help a special needs child." "But..." Sister Margaret's expression was troubled. Something doesn't feel right about them. They're asking very specific questions about Sophie's inheritance potential and your relationship with her. Sophie set down her chess piece and looked directly at Marcus with eyes that held far too much understanding of adult motivations. They think you're going to give me money because I helped you, don't they? They want to adopt me so they can get rich. The thought that anyone would try to exploit this brave, brilliant child made Marcus's hands clench into fists. Sophie had already been through enough manipulation and deception with Elena's case. She deserved protection, not more people trying to use her for financial gain. "Over my dead body," Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with steel. "Sophie, I want you to know that I will not let anyone take advantage of you, not ever again." Sister Margaret looked between them with growing understanding. "Mr. Whitmore, what exactly are you suggesting?" Marcus took a deep breath, realizing that he was about to make the most important decision of his life. "I'm suggesting that if Sophie is willing, and if the courts approve, I would like to file my own adoption petition. This little girl saved my life, and I want to spend the rest of mine making sure she has every opportunity she deserves." Sophie stared at him in complete shock, her chess strategy forgotten. For the first time since he had known her, she looked exactly like what she was, a 7-year-old child who had never dared to hope that someone might actually want her forever. The following morning, Marcus sat across from Family Court Judge Patricia Williams in her chambers, with Sophie beside him and Sister Margaret serving as her advocate. The Henderson couple, Robert and Linda Henderson from Beverly Hills, sat on the opposite side of the room with their attorney, their expressions growing increasingly frustrated as the proceedings unfolded. "Your Honor," Robert Henderson said, his voice carrying the entitled tone of someone accustomed to getting his way, "we have substantial financial resources and can provide Sophie with opportunities that a single man, regardless of his wealth, simply cannot offer. She needs a traditional family structure with both a mother and father figure." Judge Williams, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and 30 years of experience dealing with child welfare cases, studied the adoption petitions carefully. "Mr. Henderson, I've reviewed your application, and I notice that this is your first contact with our adoption system. You've never fostered children, never volunteered with youth organizations, and you filed this petition just 4 days after Sophie's story appeared on national television." Linda Henderson shifted uncomfortably in her designer suit. "We were inspired by Sophie's courage and intelligence. We believe we can provide her with the cultural advantages and educational opportunities that her exceptional abilities deserve." Sophie had been unusually quiet throughout the proceedings, but now she spoke up with characteristic directness. "Your Honor, may I ask Mrs. Henderson a question?" Judge Williams nodded. "Of course, Sophie. This decision affects your life more than anyone else's." Sophie turned to face Linda Henderson with the serious expression of someone conducting an important interview. "Mrs. Henderson, what's my favorite book?" Linda Henderson blinked in surprise. Well, I assume children your age enjoy picture books, or perhaps early chapter books." "It's A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline L'Engle," Sophie said quietly. "Mr. Whitmore knows that because he's read it to me 3 times. "What's my biggest fear?" Robert Henderson interjected impatiently. "This is hardly relevant to our ability to provide." "Being forgotten," Sophie continued, ignoring his interruption. "I'm afraid that people will stop caring about me once the cameras go away, and I'm not famous anymore. Mr. Whitmore knows that because we've talked about it. What do I want to be when I grow up?" The Hendersons exchanged uncertain glances. They had clearly expected this to be a simple matter of filling out paperwork and claiming custody of a child who had suddenly become valuable. "I want to become either a federal investigator or a family court judge like you, Your Honor, so I can protect other children from people who try to hurt them. Mr. Whitmore knows that because he's been helping me research law schools and detective training programs." Judge Williams leaned forward with interest. "Mr. Whitmore, how long have you known Sophie?" "About 2 years, Your Honor. I've been visiting St. Mary's regularly to work with their computer education program." Sophie has always stood out, not just because of her intelligence, but because of her character. She helps younger children with their homework. She volunteers for extra chores to help the nuns. And she's never asked me for anything, not once, until she risked everything to save me from fraud. Marcus pulled out a folder thick with documents. I've prepared a comprehensive plan for Sophie's education and care. Private tutoring to advance her academic development, counseling to help her process her early trauma, exposure to cultural activities and travel, and most importantly, unconditional love and support from someone who already knows and values exactly who she is. Sister Margaret spoke up for the first time. Your Honor, I've watched Mr. Whitmore interact with our children for 2 years. He never makes promises he doesn't keep. He treats every child with genuine respect, and Sophie lights up whenever he visits. This isn't a publicity stunt or a financial arrangement. This is about 2 people who have found family in each other. Robert Henderson's frustration finally boiled over. This is ridiculous. A single billionaire cannot provide the stable family environment that a child needs. Sophie requires proper supervision, feminine role models, and Mr. Henderson, Judge Williams interrupted sharply. Are you suggesting that single parents are inherently unfit? Because that would disqualify approximately 30% of American families. Sophie looked up at Marcus with eyes that held a mixture of hope and terror. Mr. Whitmore, are you sure you want to adopt me? I'm not easy to take care of. I ask too many questions. I read instead of playing with toys. And I have nightmares sometimes about my parents' accident. Marcus knelt down to Sophie's eye level, his voice gentle but absolutely certain. Sophie, you are the most remarkable person I've ever met. Your questions make me think harder. Your intelligence inspires me to be better, and if you have nightmares, I'll sit with you until they go away. You saved my life, and I want to spend the rest of mine helping you achieve anything you can dream of. Judge Williams had been watching this exchange with the practiced eye of someone who had seen countless adoption cases. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, I'm denying your petition. You've demonstrated no prior relationship with Sophie, no understanding of her individual needs, and your motivation appears to be opportunistic rather than altruistic. She turned to Marcus and Sophie with a slight smile. Mr. Whitmore, I'm granting a provisional adoption order pending the completion of standard background checks and home studies. Sophie, you'll have a 30-day trial period to make sure this is what you really want. Sophie threw her arms around Marcus's neck with the pure joy of a child who had finally found her forever home. 6 months later, Sophie Chen Whitmore stood in the marble entryway of Marcus's Denver mansion, staring up at a portrait that had just been delivered and hung in the place of honor above the grand staircase. The painting showed the 2 of them in the courthouse on the day she had exposed Elena's fraud. Marcus in his expensive suit, looking stunned and grateful, and Sophie in her simple blue dress, holding the manila envelope that had changed both their lives forever. Do you like it? Marcus asked, coming up behind her with 2 cups of hot chocolate topped with marshmallows, their evening tradition that had developed over the months since the adoption was finalized. Sophie studied the painting thoughtfully. It's beautiful, but it makes that day look more heroic than it felt. I was terrified I might be wrong, that the adults would laugh at me and send me away. Marcus sat down on the bottom step of the staircase so they could be at eye level. Sophie, that's exactly what made it heroic. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified. The past 6 months had been a period of adjustment for both of them. Marcus had converted an entire wing of his house into Sophie's private space. A bedroom decorated in her favorite colors, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a study area equipped with advanced computer systems where she could pursue her passion for research and investigation. Sophie had been enrolled in an accelerated academic program that challenged her exceptional intelligence while still allowing her to be a child. She had also started working with Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a child psychologist who specialized in helping gifted children process trauma and develop healthy coping mechanisms. Dad, Sophie said. The word still felt new and wonderful to both of them. "I've been thinking about something. The FBI investigator, Agent Patterson, said that Carmen, had hurt other people before she tried to hurt you. What happened to the money she stole from those other men?" Marcus had been wondering when Sophie would ask about this. Her sense of justice was so strong that he knew she wouldn't be satisfied until all of Elena's victims received some form of restitution. "Most of the money was never recovered," Marcus admitted. "She spent it on luxury items, gambling, and funding her false identities. The FBI was able to seize about $4 million in assets, but that's only a fraction of what she stole over the years." Sophie was quiet for a long moment, her analytical mind clearly working through a complex problem. "Dad, what if we could help those people? Not by giving them money directly, but by using your foundation to support causes they care about, like making donations in their names to charities they support?" Marcus felt his heart swell with pride and amazement. Even at 7 years old, Sophie's first instinct was to heal the damage that Elena had caused, rather than simply celebrate their own victory. "That's a brilliant idea, sweetheart. We could reach out to Elena's other victims and ask them to choose charitable causes that matter to them. It wouldn't replace their financial losses, but it might help them feel like something positive came from their terrible experiences." Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "And we could also use what happened to educate other people about marriage fraud. Maybe create a website or write a book about the warning signs that people should watch for." Marcus realized that his daughter, the word filled him with joy every time he thought it, was already thinking like the advocate and protector she hoped to become. Her traumatic experience with Elena's deception was being transformed into a mission to prevent other people from suffering similar betrayals. "Sophie, there's something else I want to talk to you about. Agent Patterson called this morning. They've arrested 2 more people who were working with Elena. A forger who created fake documents, and a private investigator who helped her research wealthy targets. The prosecutor wants to know if you'd be willing to testify at their trials." Sophie's expression grew serious. "Would my testimony help put them in prison so they can't hurt other families?" "Yes, it probably would. But testifying means facing defense attorneys who might try to make you feel bad about what you did, or suggest that you were lying about the evidence you found." Sophie stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where Marcus had installed a playground and climbing structure for her to enjoy. After a few minutes of thoughtful silence, she turned back to him with determination in her eyes. "Dad, you told me that courage means doing what's right, even when it's scary. Those people helped Elena try to steal your money and destroy your life. If I don't testify, they might do the same thing to other families. I have to help stop them." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes as he watched his remarkable daughter choose justice over comfort once again. Sophie had lost her birth parents to a drunk driver's selfishness, but she was determined to use her own experiences to protect other people from predators and criminals. "I'm so proud of you, Sophie. We'll make sure you have all the support you need." The federal courthouse in Denver was packed with media and spectators as Sophie Chen Whitmore, now 8 years old, walked to the witness stand with the same calm determination she had shown during her first dramatic courthouse appearance. She wore a simple navy blue dress and carried herself with dignity far beyond her years. Marcus sat in the front row, his hands clenched with nervous energy as he watched his daughter prepare to face the defense attorney who would try to discredit her testimony. Agent Patterson had warned them that the lawyer representing Eleanor's accomplices was known for aggressive cross-examination tactics, even with child witnesses. "Miss Chen Whitmore," the prosecutor began gently, "can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant Marcus Whitmore?" "He's my adoptive father," Sophie said clearly into the microphone. "But before the adoption, I knew him as a kind man who donated computers to our orphanage and read stories to the children." "And can you describe how you discovered the fraudulent marriage certificate?" Sophie methodically explained her investigation process, from finding the suspicious document to cross-referencing public records, to uncovering Elena's multiple false identities. Her testimony was precise, factual, and devastating to the defense's case. But when Elena's defense attorney, Martin Crawford, stood up for cross-examination, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Crawford was a thin man in his 50s, with cold eyes and a reputation for destroying witness credibility through intimidation. "Miss Chen Whitmore," Crawford began with false friendliness, "isn't it true that you now stand to inherit millions of dollars from Mr. Whitmore because of your testimony against my client?" Sophie looked confused by the question. "I don't understand what you mean, sir." "Come now, young lady. You're living in a mansion, attending expensive private schools, and enjoying a lifestyle you never could have imagined at that orphanage. Isn't it possible that you fabricated evidence against Ms. Rodriguez because you knew it would make you rich?" Marcus started to rise from his seat, furious at the attorney's implications, but Sophie's clear voice stopped him. "Sir, I didn't know Mr. Whitmore was planning to adopt me when I brought the evidence to court. I was just trying to stop a bad person from stealing money that helps children all over the world. And I didn't fabricate anything. I can show you exactly how to verify every document I found." Crawford pressed harder, clearly hoping to rattle the young witness. "But surely you realize that discrediting Ms. Rodriguez has made you very wealthy. Doesn't that create a motivation for you to lie?" Sophie was quiet for a moment, and Marcus held his breath. Then she spoke with the wisdom of someone who had learned early in life what really mattered. "Mr. Crawford, before Mr. Whitmore adopted me, I lived in a room with 3 other girls at St. Mary's Orphanage. I owned 2 dresses, 4 books, and a stuffed elephant named Buttons. I was happy because the nuns loved us and took good care of us. Now I live in a big house with my dad, and I have lots of books and nice clothes, and I'm still happy, but not because of the money." She paused and looked directly at the attorney. "I'm happy because I have a family. And having a family isn't something you can buy or steal or lie about. It's something that happens when people choose to love each other. Your client Elena tried to steal Mr. Whitmore's money, but what she really tried to steal was his ability to trust people and build a real family. That's much worse than taking money." The courtroom was completely silent. Crawford, for the first time in his career, found himself speechless in the face of an 8-year-old's moral clarity. Judge Martinez leaned forward. "Mr. Crawford, do you have any further questions for this witness?" Crawford looked at Sophie's steady gaze and realized that any further attacks would only make his client look worse. "No further questions, Your Honor." As Sophie stepped down from the witness stand, Marcus felt overwhelming pride in the extraordinary young woman his daughter was becoming. She had faced down a ruthless attorney with the same courage she had shown in exposing Elena's fraud, not because she was fearless, but because she understood that some things were worth being afraid for. Agent Patterson met them outside the courtroom with a broad smile. "Sophie, that was one of the most powerful testimonies I've ever witnessed. You just guaranteed that Elena's accomplices will spend the next decade in federal prison." But Sophie was already thinking ahead to their next mission. "Agent Patterson, have you found all of Elena's victims yet? Dad and I want to start our charitable restitution program as soon as possible." 2 years after Sophie's courtroom triumph, the Chen Whitmore Foundation had become one of the most respected charitable organizations in the country, focusing specifically on protecting children from fraud, abuse, and exploitation. 10-year-old Sophie now served as the Foundation's youngest board member, bringing a unique perspective to their mission of safeguarding vulnerable youth. Marcus stood in the Foundation's conference room, watching with pride as Sophie presented their latest initiative to a group of potential donors and partner organizations. She had grown taller and more confident, but her essential character, brilliant, compassionate, and fiercely committed to justice, remained unchanged. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sophie said, standing behind a podium that had been lowered to accommodate her height, "child exploitation often succeeds because predators count on children being too afraid or too ashamed to speak up. Our Young Investigators program teaches kids how to recognize dangerous situations, how to verify adult claims, and how to report suspicious behavior safely. The audience, which included FBI agents, child psychologists, and executives from major corporations, listened with rapt attention as Sophie outlined their comprehensive approach to child protection. We've already implemented this program in 43 schools across 7 states, Sophie continued, and we've prevented at least 12 potential cases of adoption fraud, 6 instances of identity theft targeting minors, and 3 attempted kidnappings. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a child development specialist from Johns Hopkins, raised her hand. Sophie, this is remarkably sophisticated work for someone your age. How do you balance this level of responsibility with normal childhood activities? Sophie smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her during the formal presentation. Dr. Mitchell, protecting other kids isn't work for me. It's like, imagine if you could use your favorite hobby to save people's lives. That's what this feels like. After the presentation, Marcus and Sophie walked through downtown Denver toward their favorite ice cream shop, a monthly tradition they had maintained since the adoption. Sophie was unusually quiet, and Marcus could tell something was troubling her. "Sweetheart, what's on your mind?" he asked as they settled into their usual corner booth. Sophie stirred her chocolate ice cream thoughtfully. "Dad, I've been thinking about something important. Next month I'll be 11, and I've been with you for almost 3 years now. I want to make sure you're still happy about adopting me." Marcus felt his heart constrict. "Sophie, why would you even question that? You're the best thing that ever happened to me." "Because I know I'm not like other kids," Sophie said quietly. "I don't play with dolls or watch cartoons. I'd rather read case studies than go to birthday parties. Sometimes I wonder if you wish you had adopted a more normal daughter who would be easier to relate to." Marcus reached across the table and took her small hand in his. "Sophie, do you remember what you told that defense attorney about family? You said that family happens when people choose to love each other. I chose to love you exactly as you are. Brilliant, serious, caring, and absolutely unique. I don't want you to be normal. Normal wouldn't have saved my life." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, something Marcus rarely saw from his usually composed daughter. "Sometimes I still have nightmares about losing you. What if something happens to you, like what happened to my birth parents? What if I end up alone again?" Marcus felt the weight of understanding. Sophie's fierce independence and maturity were partly defense mechanisms, ways of protecting herself from the vulnerability of loving someone who might disappear from her life. "Sophie, I can't promise that nothing will ever happen to me, but I can promise that you will never be alone again. I've set up legal guardianship arrangements with 3 different families who know and love you. I've established trust funds that will ensure your education and security no matter what happens. And most importantly, you're not the same person you were when your birth parents died." He squeezed her hand gently. "You were a baby then, helpless and dependent on others for everything. Now you're Sophie Chen Whitmore, the girl who exposed a criminal conspiracy, who testifies before Congress about child protection, who has already saved dozens of children from dangerous situations. You're not helpless anymore, sweetheart. You're one of the strongest people I know." Sophie wiped her eyes and looked at him with gratitude and love. "Dad, there's something else I want to tell you. Last week, Sister Margaret told me that a documentary filmmaker wants to make a movie about our story. They want to call it The Little Girl's Truth." Marcus raised his eyebrows. "What do you think about that?" "I think it could help other kids learn to protect themselves. But only if we get to tell the story our way, and only if all the profits go to help other children in foster care and orphanages." Marcus smiled at his daughter's instinctive generosity and wisdom. "I think that sounds perfect, Sophie. We'll make sure the world knows that sometimes the smallest voices can speak the most important truths." 5 years later, 15-year-old Sophie Chen Whitmore stood at the podium in the United States Capitol building, addressing a joint session of Congress about the landmark Child Protection Verification Act. legislation she had helped draft to prevent adoption fraud and identity theft targeting minors. Marcus sat in the gallery, his heart swelling with pride as he watched his remarkable daughter advocate for vulnerable children on the national stage. "Honorable senators and representatives," Sophie began, her voice clear and confident. "When I was 7 years old, I discovered that sometimes adults lie in very sophisticated ways to hurt children and families. Today, the Chen Whitmore Foundation has documented over 300 cases of adoption fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation targeting minors. This legislation will create the verification systems necessary to protect America's most vulnerable citizens." The chamber was packed with legislators, child advocacy groups, and media representatives covering what had become known as Sophie's Law, though she insisted on naming it after all the children who had suffered rather than claiming personal credit. After her testimony, Sophie and Marcus walked through the Capitol Gardens, reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. The documentary about their story had won an Academy Award and donated its profits to establish child protection programs in 12 countries. Sophie's educational foundation had provided scholarships to over 500 orphans and foster children, and Elena Vasquez was serving a 25-year federal sentence for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. "Dad," Sophie said as they sat on a bench overlooking the Washington Monument, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found those documents that day at St. Mary's?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "You would have found another way to save me, sweetheart. Maybe not that day, but eventually. Because that's who you are. Someone who can't stand to see injustice and won't rest until she fixes it." Sophie, now a sophomore at Georgetown University studying law and criminal justice at age 15, had maintained her commitment to protecting children while also allowing herself to experience more typical teenage activities. She played chess competitively, volunteered at local orphanages, and had even started dating a fellow student named David, who shared her passion for social justice. "Sometimes I think about Elena," Sophie admitted. "Not because I feel sorry for her, but because I wonder what made her become someone who could hurt people so easily. Do you think she was born evil, or did something happen to her that broke her empathy?" It was a profound question that Marcus had pondered himself. "I think Elena made choices, Sophie. Maybe she experienced trauma or hardship that influenced those choices, but ultimately she decided to use her intelligence to harm people rather than help them. You experienced trauma too, losing your parents, living in an orphanage, facing uncertainty about your future, but you chose to use your gifts to protect others." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "The difference is that I was surrounded by people who taught me that hurting others was wrong. Sister Margaret, you, Dr. Morrison, all of you showed me that using my abilities to help people would make me happier than using them for selfish purposes." As the sun set over the Capitol, casting golden light across the gardens, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary young woman his daughter had become. Sophie had not only saved his fortune and his faith in human goodness, she had shown the world that courage, intelligence, and moral clarity could triumph over even the most sophisticated forms of deception. "Sophie," Marcus said, putting his arm around her shoulders, "I want you to know that saving me from Eleanor's fraud was just the beginning of all the good you're going to do in this world. You've already changed laws, protected hundreds of children, and inspired thousands of people to stand up for what's right." Honest, Sophie leaned against her father's shoulder, feeling the deep contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. "Dad, do you remember what you told me that Christmas when I was sick with pneumonia? You said that sometimes the smallest people can make the biggest difference." Marcus smiled at the memory. "I had no idea I was talking to someone who would prove that point so dramatically." Well," Sophie said, with the confident smile of someone who had learned that the truth, however small or unexpected its source, was always more powerful than the most elaborate lies. "I guess we both learned that families aren't just about blood relationships or legal documents. They're about people who choose to believe in each other and fight for each other, no matter what. As they walked back toward the Capitol building, where a reception was being held to celebrate the passage of Sophie's legislation, Marcus knew that their story, which had begun with fraud and deception in a Denver courtroom, had become something much more profound, a testament to the power of truth, the importance of courage, and the unbreakable bonds that form when two people choose to build a family based on love, respect, and shared commitment to making the world a little bit better for the children who need protection most. The little girl's truth had not only saved a billionaire from financial ruin, it had created a legacy of justice that would protect countless other children for generations to come.